Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about flute. And we're going to talk about the basics of flute, a lot of which a lot of you guys probably already know, but I think it's good to start at the beginning so that you don't miss anything. This is loosely based around what I did with the piccolo video, which is linked in the cards. If you guys want me to remake the piccolo video as well, please let me know. And I'm also going to be going into contemporary notation and contemporary techniques in coming weeks. So yeah, let's get started. So first we're going to talk about the different types of flutes. And there's a bunch of different ways to categorize instruments, but I'm going to use the most common three, which are student, intermediate, and professional. And before I break down each category, I want to make it very clear that the major factor that puts an instrument into one of these three categories is the way it was manufactured, not the features it has. They do have relatively distinctive features, but the reality is student flutes are machine-made and usually made of the lowest quality materials that you can make flutes out of, generally nickel silver or plated with nickel silver. Intermediate flutes are a combination of handmade and machine-made, or sometimes they're all machine-made, it kind of depends. And they're usually nickel silver plated with sterling silver, and you might get a sterling silver head joint in the mix. And then you have professional models, which are handmade, and they're made out of sterling silver, gold, platinum, or a combination of all three. So they're the highest quality, and they've had the most time put into them. Now that we have that out of the way, student flutes. They're for the beginners, and because of that, they're the most simple of the instruments. They have closed holes because that's the easiest thing to play. Closed holes are also referred to as plateau keys because they have a plateau on them. It's easy. They have a C foot, which means that the lowest note the flute can play is middle C, and they have offset G keys, which means that the left ring finger key, or the G key, is offset from the body of the rest of the keys. That's easier for smaller hands to work with, and since these flutes are marketed for beginners who tend to be smaller, it's easier for them to play. Intermediate flutes are the least distinctive category in that there's so many different options. Whether it's the material or the fact that you can have closed hole intermediates, you can have open hole intermediates, you can have C foot, or you can have B foot intermediates. B foot means that there is a low B on the instrument, so it's a half step lower. And this one is really categorized by how it's made. Because there are so many different options. And then you get professional flutes, which again have a lot of different options, but they're handmade and they're made out of very expensive materials. They, however, can still be closed hole. They can still have a C foot, and they can be inline or offset, and that's a custom decision that the player makes. Inline means that the G key is in line with the rest of the body of the flute. It's easier for someone with longer hands or bigger hands to play. It's all personal, and that's why professional models are so custom, is because you have so many things that you can change. I've actually seen instruments that have partially closed hold. So the left hand is closed and the right hand is open. That's a model that Albert Cooper invented, called the orchestral model. And it's really up to the player at that point, but they're fancy and they're expensive. Yeah. With the more custom instruments, you have more custom options. And there are really four that are the most popular, but there are a bunch of others. The first one is a D-sharp roller, which is a roller that goes on the D-sharp key. Imagine that. It's basically a facilitator to help your pinky move around the foot joint. Some people love them, some people think it's kind of cheating. It really doesn't matter. Next, you have a C-sharp trill key, which is an extra key that allows you to play C to C sharp and B to C sharp and a few other things without having to have the awkward index finger motion. It's an entire extra key on the instrument, which means that it's definitely the most expensive option. And some people don't like it because it adds extra weight to the instrument. And again, some people think it's cheating. Some people think that the C sharp isn't as in tune. It is, again, personal preference. I love mine, but you are welcome to your own opinion. Then you have the other two, which are kind of two different ways to do the same thing. And that's split E and a high E facilitator, which is also sometimes referred to as a donut. The donuts are basically an insert that they put in the key that's attached to the G key, and it helps you play high E more easily. That's E6. The split E is a more in-depth mechanism, and until recently it was only available on offset G instruments, but it basically does the same thing where when you play high E, the key attached to the G key goes down and helps you play high E more easily. It can also, does affect some other notes, and that's why some people really hate them. If any of you have ever seen a Jeffrey Kainer masterclass, he talks about how Yamaha builds a custom switch on all of his instruments so he can turn it off if he needs if he needs to play the notes that are affected by it. That's a very expensive option, but it's always a give and take. And they do now have certain makers that make them on inline instruments, but it is still really an option that's most commonly available on offset instruments. So that's also something to keep in mind. So clearly the lower range of the instrument is really depending on what instrument the flutist has. It can be C4 or B3 dependent. The upper range is where it gets a little fuzzier. And that's because there are standards and then there's the physical limits. And those are a little different. Technically, the flute goes up to about C8, but those notes are so hard to hit. Probably the real limit is F7, which is the super F that a lot of people do in the end of the Barrett Concerto. The orchestral standard is D7, which is really what most students have to be able to hit consistently. If you're playing specific repertoire, you do have to have higher notes, but that D is pretty much the highest note, and please don't make that joke. We've talked about the physical instrument, but what about playing it? Clearly, it's a wind instrument. I hope you know that. What a lot of people don't realize is that only about half of your air is actually going into the instrument. The other half skims over the top, and that's how the sound is produced. But it also means that you waste a lot of your air. Flute actually uses more air than any instrument except tuba. Tuba has more just because of the physical size of the instrument, but despite it being a tiny, tiny instrument, there's a lot of air required, which means that it's harder for flute players to play the super long phrases that the reed players in the woodwind family can. It's an unfortunate symptom of how we have to play. One of the things that it does allow us, because there are fewer partials and there's less back pressure, we can actually double tongue and we can triple tongue, which allows us to play very, very quickly articulated. It's the same mechanics as any brass player, but it's just a little bit easier because there's nothing pressing up against our face, creating more pressure. Yes, the flute is there, but it's still the same. And the last thing I wanted to talk about in the physical side is embouchures are not one size fit all. And a lot of you guys know that, but for flute, it really doesn't matter where your embouchure is as long as it's relaxed and focused. A lot of you guys know that I play out of the right side of my mouth, and that's mainly because of my surgeries, but it's also just more comfortable. Louis Maurice played basically all the way on the left side of his face, and we all know how incredible he was. Rampal was the same way. Some people play more centered, some people play slightly offset. It really doesn't matter. If you take anything out of this video, it's that there are a lot of choices and they are totally valid ones. The last thing is, how do you go about finding a flute? There's so many different makers and there's so many different options, it's really intimidating. With student flutes, if it comes from a reputable brand, the pads are in good shape, and you're getting it from a reputable dealer, you're probably fine. If you can buy it at Target or Walmart, maybe avoid it. But if it's been repaired as a used flute and has good quality pads and everything like that in it, or it's new from a reputable dealer, you're probably fine. If you're not sure whether it's reputable, have a teacher or someone who knows a little bit more about the instrument try it or give you some suggestions. Personally, I swear by Yamaha student flutes, and I'm a little biased because that's what I started on, but I think they're really, really great quality, and they actually put a lot of attention into their instruments despite them being mass manufactured. When you get into the intermediate and the professional models, that's where trials are so important. If the store doesn't offer a trial system, don't buy from them, because you cannot figure out what you like from 20 minutes to an hour of playing it. You just can't. And if you're going to spend $2,000 or $15,000 on an instrument, you want to know that it's something that you are going to love and are actually going to get better on. Most music stores will have a system where you can get it for 3 to 7 days. And that's usually enough time to kind of get an idea of whether you like it or not. It's definitely important to play for other people, to play for teachers and people who know you're playing and know what you need in an instrument. And it's also important to try a lot of instruments. So go to a music store and try a bunch of things, and then take 3 home and see what you like from there, and then narrow it down. Or take 1 home and try it from there, and if you don't like it, send it back and try another one. If you happen to have a store that's local, it's even easier, because then you don't have to ship things back and forth, and it's a little less expensive. And I understand that this is an expensive process, but the reality is it's better to spend a little bit more money in the trial process to find something that you love than to have to buy a new flute 2 months later. It's just not worth it. When you're dealing with the manufacturers, like the actual brands that make flutes, you're generally buying the concept of an instrument, which is harder. But hopefully when you're at the point that you're spending that much money on a flute, you have a better idea of your playing, what you personally need, and you have a better idea of how to trial an instrument. And that's something that I can definitely talk about in a later video, but if you're at that point, then you should have a better idea of what you're looking for, and telling the manufacturer, the maker, what you're looking for is also very important at that stage. When I tried my instrument, I went to all these makers and goes, I want an inline instrument, sterling silver, with a C-sharp trill and all of these things. And when I went to trial them, they had models pulled out for me. I actually ended up buying a trial model from Haynes. And I've since modified my setup a little bit, but I knew what I wanted, I knew what I was looking for, and I found an instrument that suited what I was looking for because I told them what I wanted. So yeah, this is my breakdown of the basics of flute and kind of the basics of buying a flute, or trialing a flute at least. I hope you guys enjoy. I am definitely going to go more in depth on contemporary techniques and the contemporary notation, because that's something that I clearly am super passionate about. If you guys haven't seen my latest video, please go check that out, and if you want to support me more, please check out my Patreon. I'm really excited about the things that we're doing over there, and I will see you guys very soon.